Om, 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 Om Namo Bhagavate Buddhaya. So we are reading this preface from this book, The Buddhist Thought in India, by Conze. And we just started the preface to this book, which was actually written in June of 1961. 1961, when he is writing this book, when he was writing the preface to the book, so which means probably the entire text was already complete and he was writing a preface before printing it. He says, we don't know what to expect by 1970. So he hasn't obviously seen what we are experiencing in 2022, 23. So that's one. And so a couple of important ideas were given. So, we have a habit of seizing upon the dharmas as a habit, as a customary thing. We have been habituated to it, to be precise. And in contrary to that, the teaching of the Buddha or any spiritual text tells you to give up that identification. Seizing upon means identifying, to identify with the dharmas. Though it is not mentioned here yet, the word dharma means, for example, when we say, even in the Hindu system, the words prakriti or the material or the matter, pradhana in the Sankhya. So we basically imagine that primordial matter comprises of three gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas. Here if you see, the sattvas, rajas, tamas are not attributes. They are the constituents, they are the components which make up the prakriti. So though it may appear by mistake in the usage that they are the qualities, they are not the qualities, they are the substances. They are the substances, they are the substantials themselves that constitute the prakriti or pradhana. Similarly, the Buddhist analysis, for whatever interesting reasons, which will come later on, they imagine that all our experiences comprise of dharmas. So dharmas. Dharmas means events. Dharmas means phenomena, let us say, phenomena, or things. So every experience that we have in our lives is an event, is a thing, is a phenomena. So those are called dharmas. So, and what happens? We seize upon them, rather we identify with them. That is what we mean by seizing upon. So a thought comes that money comes in our idea and say, I'm a wealthy man. So you seize upon it, you identify with it. So this is what is the Buddhistic approach, to look at the physical dharmas or tangible dharmas, means which are objects and things, and then also the mental or the subtle dharmas, the ideas that we get, and identify, oh, I am such a man. I am a strong person, we say. I am a weak person, mentally. So that identification with them, identification with those dharmas, which has become customary to us. We don't say, oh, this is another idea that came and I am not with it. We don't see like that. We identify with those and suffer through them. So Buddhistic way of mental or mind analysis is this: identifying the dharmas and see that I am not that dharma. The dharma is not mine. Two aspects of it. I am neither the dharma, nor I belong to it, nor it belongs to me. So that way of working is no different from a different way of explaining in the Upanishads, though I am not trying to go to that direction right now because it is really far away from where we are now. So this was what is important. What is this? As contrary to the ways of the whole world, has this dharma been demonstrated? It teaches you not to seize upon dharmas, but the world is want to grasp at anything. Want, spelling is different, W-O-N-T, want or want. Meaning it has become a habit and a customary to seize upon it, and we should desist from it, resist from it. And he also said ostensible erudition versus demonstrable insight. So all of us, ostensible means it appears to be the cause, but it is not the real cause. Ostensible erudition means it appears like very intelligent. Bhagavan Sri Krishna also says in the second chapter of the Gita. Says to Arjuna, you are having this kind of silly doubts and you talk as if you are a scholar. So in the second chapter, asocyan anvasocastvam pragnavadamscha bhashase gatasu nagatasuscha nanusochanti pandita. And then when he says that the intelligent man never grieves about the people who are living are gone, in this context Krishna says, you are crying like a fool, but you talk as if you are a smart, intelligent man. Nanu sochanti panditaha. So the intelligent people never grieve. So pragnavadamscha bhashase. That's what Sri Krishna says. Pragnavadamscha bhashase. You are speaking as if you are a very intelligent man, but you are suffering, he says. Means intelligent man will not suffer. So that kind of ostensible erudition is not desirable, and you must seek what he said here, demonstrable insight. Our life should be a demonstration of insight. Our behavior, our ease with life should reflect a demonstrable insight. And as he said, we hear the common word, the materialistic attitude, that's what he says, the primary cause. The secondary one is the niceness. But the primary thing is our pursuit of the industrial revolution, he said, or the technological grip that we are under right now, which is really causing the disturbance in the mind and not able to do a quiet contemplation. So we need to, if somebody is really serious, though it looks very crazy and impractical, at least we should reduce the influence of these external environment on us. That's what it meant. Now, after reflecting for many years on the causes which might have demolished the spiritual tradition of mankind, I have reluctantly come to the almost incredible conclusion that the life of the spirit is not governed by natural causes. Life of spirit is not governed by the natural causes. We'll understand what it means. The life of spirit is not governed by natural causes. Meaning, this spiritual life of spirit does not occur naturally. That's what it means. It's not caused, the life of the spirit is not governed by natural causes. Natural causes. It is not governed by that. To quote Saint Paul, the quote is, "For our fight is not against human foes, but against cosmic powers, against the authorities and potentates of this dark world, against the superhuman forces of evil in the heavens." So this is what it is. For our fight is not against human foes. but against cosmic powers, against the authorities and potentates of this dark world, against the superhuman forces of evil in the heavens. So to quote St. Paul, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Yeah, the St. Paul says, we wrestle not against the flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of the world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. To quote St. Paul, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So he is probably implying here that the physical limitations is not the cause of our struggle, lack of understanding, but it is something higher than that. Of course, which we analyze and figure out what that higher impulses or forces are as we go by. 3 stages can, in fact, be distinguished in the decline of spiritual knowledge. 3 stages can, in fact, be distinguished in the decline of spiritual knowledge. First, about 5 centuries ago, both in Asia and in Europe, spiritual creativeness began to wane, and no authoritative religious work was of outstanding genius has been produced since that time. A book on biochemistry is normally the more informative, the more recent it is. With religious books, it is very much the other way around. By the 19th century, even spiritual perceptiveness had reached a low ebb, as shown, to take only 2 examples, by Wordsworth's statement quite at the beginning of the century, and also Nietzsche's remarks about God being dead towards its end. Now, in the middle of the 20th century, the living tradition of spiritual knowledge is almost extinct. The organized centers of spiritual contemplations have everywhere been smashed. Progress and civilization seem to have it all their own way, and a new breed of men who care for none of all this have crowded the earth with their presence. So obviously the spiritual men have gone and the worldly people have crowded. It says, looking at the surface of society, one may well believe that in spiritual matters, the age of the moron has dawned. Though what goes on in the depths is hard to fathom, nevertheless, I am well aware that it is a decidedly quixotic understanding to put one's name to a book in which these ancient and anachronistic ideas are treated as if they were immediately relevant to the conduct of life even at the present time. Okay? So basically he's saying the basic type of people have changed from the pursuit of spiritual matters to the material pursuits have increased. But he also remarks before that though what goes on in the depths is hard to fathom. So though it appears today to us that the whole world has become materialistic, we also hear in the market there's so much of internal transformations happening in the psyche of people. So that's what he's saying here. Though what goes on in the depths is hard to fathom. For example, he's quoting here, of course, these are to support his idea. He's saying, or as Wordsworth put in his preface, I quote, reflecting upon the magnitude of the general evil, I should be oppressed with no dishonorable melancholy, had I not a deep impression of certain inherent and indestructible qualities of the human mind, and likewise of certain powers in the great and permanent objects that act upon us, which are equally inherent and indestructible. What he's saying is, though we see this, but he says, I have intuitively have a belief or an inclination to trust. He says, had I not a deep impression of certain inherent and indestructible qualities of human mind. He says, even though all this is happening, he believes there is an indestructible quality in the mind. And likewise of certain powers in the great and permanent objects that act upon us. Permanent objects are acting upon us. That's what he believes. Likewise, certain powers in the great and permanent objects that act upon us, which are equally inherent and indestructible. For example, in spite of all the calamity and chaos and melancholy that we see, people still believe that there is a God. They believe there is some inherent goodness in human being. If there was no inherent goodness in human being, how would they be transformable? How would one envisage that they can be transformed to be better human beings? So in spite of all the evil that we see, society primarily bases its future with this belief that human beings are transformable. That's what Wordsworth said, and based on which the spiritual pursuit works. If I believe that I cannot be transformed, this is all I am about, I am destined to destruction, who will make an effort? Now, in spite of all the odds, people believe that they can improve, they can change, they can prosper. So that is what is important in his writing here. Nevertheless, I am well aware that it is a decidedly quixotic understanding to put one's name to a book in which these ancient and anachronistic ideas are treated as if they were immediately relevant to the conduct of life even at the present time. He says, of course, he finds difficult that he is now addressing these very old ideas in this modern world. He says it's a very quixotic, a freakish idea type. In addition to being a voice crying to the wilderness, I also attempt to make a contribution to philosophical thought. Crying in the wilderness, I also attempt to make a contribution to the philosophical thought. Mathematics took a big step forward when Bolyai, Lobachevsky, and Gauss created non-Euclidean geometries and showed that from different postulates, alternative valid and coherent geometrics can be constructed. Philosophy is bound to follow suit. The rapid growth of communications has brought Eastern and Western cultures face to face. So far, European and particularly British philosophers have reacted by becoming more provincial than ever before. They will not be able to keep up this stance forever. On the suppositions of Indian yoga, a philosophical system can be built which is as valid, cogent, and coherent as those based on modern science. So, because he is trying to say that the so-called the Europe in the 19th century, etc., they focused more on the so-called modern science and they denounced the Eastern yogic system. He's saying, no, we should, that is also a valid science. On the suppositions of Indian yoga, a philosophical system can be built which is as valid, cogent, and coherent as those based on modern science. By showing this in some detail, for Buddhist philosophy, I hope that European philosophers will one day be made to examine, question, and substantiate their own latent presuppositions. Because all this blame on the Eastern philosophy is because of their own presuppositions by the Europeans. At present, the omens are, I admit, most unpropitious. Unpropitious. And they're not very favorable, that's what he means. With the honorable exception of Professor H. Price, no Oxford or Cambridge professor would demean himself by paying the slightest attention to his colleagues of ancient India. No Oxford professor would demean himself by paying the slightest attention to his colleagues of ancient India. The failure in communication was well illustrated in 1960 when an extremely intelligent journalist was generally applauded for publishing a widely read book devoted to the thesis that there is nothing to the wisdom of the East. A closer analysis of his argument he is referring to his own an article on Kostler's Lotus and the Robo, another article which he wrote about this topic. So a closer analysis of his argument showed that he just reiterated the vulgar prejudices of those who, from mere tribal sluggishness, are convinced that Western, that is Judeo-Christian and scientific modes of thinking are the unfailing standards of all truth. It is for the purpose of breaking down this kind of blindness and incomprehension that this book has been written. So if you see, he is not writing a book to denounce the Eastern philosophy or yoga, but he wants to say the biases in the Europe and the so-called modern world. By the time he is writing this book in 1960s, he wants to demonstrate that ideas of the Eastern philosophy are tangible. So he's saying most of the European scientists did not pay attention, etc. And only H. Price was the one who paid a little respect. And he says he wants to demolish the bad opinions of the many people in this book by explaining the concepts of the Eastern philosophies, by taking Buddhist thinking. In bringing out a new history of Buddhist philosophy, I must say a few words about my predecessors. The first attempt at a general survey was that of A.B. Keith, Buddhist philosophy in India and Ceylon in 1923. It is now quite superseded, partly because in the meantime many new sources have become available, and partly because the superciliousness of his tone belongs to a phase in the treatment of subject nations which has now passed. So colonial time. So his tone is a little bit supercilious, means egoistic or superiority kind of thing. So that stage is gone. E.J. Thompson's The History of Buddhist Thoughts, 1933, is good on the Theravada. But he obviously had never taken much interest in the Mahayana. So E.J. Thomas' book does not cover Mahayana. Stetcherbatsky's Buddhist logic is a masterpiece of the first order and in a class by itself. So probably it's a book worth taking a look at, how Stecher from Russia wrote the Buddhist thinking as a logical system. First order and in a class by itself. I feel almost ashamed to write on the same subject with so much less space at my disposal. I think the Buddhist logic by Stecher is almost about 1200 pages, whereas this book is hardly about 275 pages. So obviously you cannot write as much as Stecher could write. As one would expect of a work published in Leningrad under Stalin's watchful eyes, Buddhism is here treated as a purely rational system and the religious side ignored. So Stecher book treats it as a logical system and ignores the religious side of it. All I can do to repay the immense debt I owe to Stecher is to challenge his fundamental position. Two other works deserve being mentioned. L. Silburn's Instant et Cause is fairly erudite, but deficient in intellectual acumen, clarity of thought, and esprit de synthèse. E. Frau Wallner's Anthologie die Philosophie des Buddhismus, 1956, is an indispensable source book to which I owe much. The only difference between us is that I do not share Frau Wallner's fondness for the Yogacarins, and that with Professor Murthy I regard the Madhyamikas as the representatives of the central tradition of Buddhism. So there is one T.V.R. Murthy, who was a great man who wrote about Madhyamika philosophy in India. So that's what he is referring to. He says, I agree with more of the thoughts of the Madhyamika philosophy of Nagarjuna, let us say, and not with the Yogacharins, means Asanga and Vasubandhu as the main, Maitreya also. Some sections of this book have been printed before, and I give thanks for permission to reprint them to the middle way. The Hubbard Journal, the Philosophy East and West, the Mahabodhi Journal, East and West Rome, the Aryan Path, Oriens Extremus, and Self-Knowledge. St. Anthony's College of Oxford deserves my gratitude for its support in the work involved in writing this book. Sherborne, Dorset, in June 1961, Edward Conze. So as you can see, of course somehow I always read books like that. I read from, from the beginning to the end. And of course there will be many new ideas and some difficulties as well, but I certainly want to get into the mind of those authors, not just to gloss them, so that we can easily gain the knowledge that they accumulate over 30 years, 40 years, 50 years time, which I don't have that much time. So I only have an opportunity to read a book written by those great authors diligently and gain as much as possible to calm my own mind, calm my own doubts, and come into clarity. And I hope that you too pursue the spirituality with the same spirit and evaluate what I have done over this 1 hour in two sessions, and you will be able to comment back to me whether it is of any value or not. And also, incidentally, this book is only into 3 sections. I think I said 4 sections earlier. 3 sections, where the 3rd section includes Mahayana, and at the end of it, there are 2 chapters on Buddhist logic and the Tantra. So 3 sections, and I intend to at least read through the first section, having about 116 pages. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.